Hello and welcome back to another Wainrider Wednesday, the weekly series where we take a look at upcoming progress for the mod Total War Wainriders. This is a mod set in the Third Age of Middle-earth, well before the events of the War of the Ring, at a time when the Wainriders from the east are invading and causing problems for Gondor, and all sorts of other things are happening around the map. And the faction we are concerned with today is a very interesting hybrid faction, you could say, that we are calling the League of the North. Now, this is a Dwarven/Mannish faction. There is another such faction that we have looked at, the Highland tribes, which we saw in a previous video, and they're actually located fairly nearby. But whereas the Highland tribes are a Mannish-led faction with some limited Dwarven recruitment as support, the League of the North is a Dwarven-led faction with some Mannish support, so sort of a flip of the Highland tribes. This is one of those factions that is not strictly attested in the lore, but we know that there were people, dwarves and men, living in this region. And so we have some interesting bits of evidence for that. What I'd like to do to start off this preview for the campaign is just read a little bit of the background that we've established for them, or that we've come up with for them. And then we'll jump into the campaign map to see how their position looks. And as a reminder, anything that we are about to see here should be considered a work in progress. We have made a lot of progress on the mod, but there is still work to be done, so none of this is necessarily written in stone. If you have any ideas, suggestions, questions, feel free to leave a comment in the comment section below, and follow the channel. Check out the other videos for not only campaign previews, but unit roster previews for the battle map side of things. So the League of the North, starting in 1864, Third Age. Long have the dwarves mined these northern lands, coaxing iron from the hills and wresting rarer prizes from the earth. In ages past, dwarves hewed a road through the forbidding forest to ease traffic between the great city of Khazad-dûm and these frontier colonies. But as with all things, the traffic began to fail. Evil things crept into the woods, and now men of ill sort have burst in from the east, disrupting trade and threatening travel. Few messages come from Khazad-dûm these days. The villages of Northmen that cluster about the lakes and rivers are filled with refugees from the south, bringing tales of wild men slaying, burning, and enslaving. At the feet of the lonely mountain, the men of the Dale gather and begin to arm, asking the dwarves for aid. So once again, as in days of old, there is an alliance between dwarves and men. No dwarf king leads them, but a dwarf lord of proud colonists, stubborn folk who have carved their mansions in this land and will not yield it to Easterlings who have only lately mastered iron. Joined to their cause are the Northmen, rough but hardy people, skilled with beasts and bows and strong of arm, unwilling to shoulder a foreign yoke. And should this league prove strong, perhaps other lands can fall under its banner. There are untapped riches in the mountains north and west, and room for many herds and farms to the south. If not snuffed out too soon, perhaps this alliance can grow, a lordship to command respect among the houses of the dwarves and to shield the people of the north from the menace of the east. So once again, we do have to say that there is no proof, strictly speaking, of an alliance such as this in the lore written by Tolkien. We do hear, however, there's some tantalizing references to Dale, the men of Dale. We hear that that at the point around which this mod takes place, I believe it's mentioned in Unfinished Tales, we have the Wainriders slaying or driving north up the River Running, men who mingled with folk of Dale under Erebor. Now this takes place centuries. This mention occurs centuries before Erebor was actually founded, not long after the year 2000, I believe, so a little bit outside of our time frame. Of course, in the history of the dwarves, around 1980 in the Third Age, and 1981 is the year that Khazad-dûm falls. The Longbeards go into their period of wandering, and about 20 years later, I think 2020, Erebor is founded, the kingdom under the mountain. Now, we have no mention of a kingdom under the mountain prior to that time, and so in this mod, Erebor is not the capital. The capital is located in the Iron Hills, which we know were mined and settled, certainly considered part of Longbeard territory in the Second Age and probably even into the First Age. So we have, essentially, as far as we know, uninterrupted settlement of dwarves around the Iron Hills. It furthermore seems kind of unbelievable that Erebor would have escaped dwarvish attention, especially since we know that from very early times there was a dwarf road connecting the Iron Hills to Khazad-dûm that would have passed within sight, surely, of the Lonely Mountain. So what we're sort of imagining here is that Erebor does exist and is mined on a smallish scale, but has not really been invested in to the extent that it would be in later years. So let's take a look at the campaign map and see what this faction has to work with. And as you can see, starting the campaign as the League of the North will center your view on Barraz-dûm. This is going to be your initial capital of the League of the North, although given the way that mismanagement works and public order and distance to capital penalties factor in, it would probably make sense to move this at some point, although again, campaign balance and all that stuff has not yet been worked out. So this is a fairly secure place in the Iron Hills. However, there may be a few more passes through the hills than you may remember from the Fourth Age Total War. The Iron Hills were not this total bastion of defense, of course. They were hills. They were not steep, forbidding mountains. Although it is rather remarkable that dwarves seem to have clung on in these mansions for as long as they did, given the presence of so many foes, right? Even in the Third Age War of the Ring, Iron Hills seem never to have been threatened. So possibly these were just considered fairly inaccessible, just far from power centers or something. So this will be a fairly safe place for your start. It is, of course, a dwarven settlement, and so this is going to use the dwarven settlement model for the mod here. And again, we've got some resources around here. We've got, I guess, copper. This is, I think, a new resource for Wainriders. This did not exist in Fourth Age Total War. And then I believe we would have iron as well as another trade resource there. And then going west, we'll find the other settlements that you begin with. Of course, Erebor here, we've got another dwarven settlement. Again, this is going to be potentially fairly wealthy given the resources that it will have access to, but it's not going to be as built up to the formidable level that you may remember from later eras. Again, this is before the Kingdom Under the Mountain. This is the League of the North. These are Longbeards, but this mod takes place well after Khazad-dûm has essentially become isolated. So we've got, this is at best sort of a lordship of fairly isolated Longbeards trying to do the best that they can. And the Mannish settlement you start off with, there's only one actually, and that is, we're calling this Angwind here. This is the settlement that controls the region of the Upper Kelduin Vales. You'll notice that there is no settlement at the region of Dale or at the Long Lake, and that is because these settlements simply did not exist as far as we can tell at this point. The reference that I mentioned earlier to men mingling with folk in Dale beneath Erebor, that potentially could be viewed as a reference to the fact that there is a geographical feature, a dale, between the arms of the Lonely Mountain. So we're viewing that not as a reference to an earlier founding of the city, but to simply a reference to people living in the lowlands where the river sort of comes out of the Lonely Mountain. So you only have 3 settlements to start, so not a terribly strong position. That said, you do have some interesting neighbors. To your west, you've got Thranduil's realm, with its 2 settlements just visible through the trees there. That makes a fairly tempting target in some ways, because you could eliminate this faction very, very quickly. Now, I'm not suggesting that. I certainly wouldn't do that in my playthrough. It wouldn't be lore-friendly, I don't think, although maybe I could come up with some justification for it. But at any rate, you're going to have a potential trade partner to your west very early on. To the north, there are some mountains, some of which will have dwarven settlements, which you will want to take advantage of. Because, again, this is a split faction in terms of its recruitment, and that is dwarven settlements will be able to train dwarves, but the vast majority of settlements on the map are not capable of dwarven recruitment, so you're going to have to make do with a lot of Mannish settlements. But securing some of those dwarven places early on would be good. Now, initially, these are going to be in rebel hands, but it probably won't take too long before the Orcish faction, which does have some power centers over here in the western Grey Mountains, they may move in this direction sooner rather than later. So it's going to be not as uncontested as you may remember in the Fourth Age Total War. We have active factions up here now, going to be doing a lot more stuff. The other direction, I guess, for your expansion is south and east. And to both of those directions, initially, you've got just rebels. You can see the rebel settlements initially from your start position here. They're spread out fairly evenly, and so there's a lot of potential here, really. You've got really your pick. And in terms of other major factions, the closest one to your south is going to be the Western Horde. So this is going to be one of the main, well, one of the two Wainrider factions in the mod. These guys are going to be at war with Gondor initially. So it may be that they're going to be very busy with their western and southwestern borders, and it might take them some time before they move towards your direction in the north, which would be great because as a primarily dwarven faction, the League of the North is liable to experience some fairly slow growth. Now, that means that your dwarven recruitment is going to be somewhat limited by that, but it may also affect your Mannish recruitment as well. This settlement here is going to be your Mannish settlement, of course, so it's going to be, looks like it's in a fairly good state initially here. Again, ignore that red face and the decline in population. This is just a very early stage of the mod. We haven't set up the initial Desker Strat file for all of that stuff. But this is going to be a fairly decent production center for you initially, and should be enough to enable you to acquire one or two of these other rebel settlements and start building those up, maybe before you have trouble from the Western Horde. The other factions, though, that you may want to deal with before they get too big would be especially the Highland tribes, which we saw in a previous video. So they're going to start over here. They've got 2 or 3 settlements initially as well. I think a couple Mannish settlements and 1 dwarven settlement. But they may be heading in your direction because this is a dwarven settlement and they can make some use of that too. Only a couple settlements or provinces separate you two, so it may be sooner than you expect before you see them knocking at your doorstep. Another faction in the area is the Avari. These are the elves around the Sea of Rune, and it's really hard to say exactly what they're going to do initially. Again, we haven't really set up the campaign to see, or at least I haven't played around with it too much to see what they're going to do. And even if I had, it would be somewhat meaningless at this point because we haven't given the AI the parameters yet, right? What are their victory conditions? What are they going to be going after? I don't know, but the AI Avari may be inclined to go in this direction because there are going to be some fairly wealthy settlements around here. They're going to be held by rebels initially, and that does make a tempting target for the AI. So if they start coming up the Kelduin, you may run up against them. They might make good trading partners, or there might be some conflict. So it'll be interesting to see how all this develops. We're going to have a quite a bit more active northeastern part of the map than you may remember from 4th Age Total War. There were a lot of smallish factions in the area then, but here we've got in the place of the large dominant factions like Dale and the Chiefdom of Rune, we've got somewhat smaller factions all around. So we've got, of course, the League of the North, the Avari, the Highland tribes, and then even the Western Horde has something like 5 settlements initially, so it's not certainly not insurmountable, and some of those are fairly new settlements. Of course, you've got Thranduil here, and then to the further west, you may have to worry about some other things. There is, of course, the orcs that we've mentioned in the mountains, but they may be coming against Thranduil's territory, moving along the southern slopes of the Grey Mountains. There's also a presence of Angmar here that you may see. Hard to tell exactly what they're going to do. Mostly, of course, Angmar's power is centered to the west of the Misty Mountains, but they may get strong and head east. But also the Eotheod. These are men who were, in terms of the lore, basically kicked out of Rovanion, forced to move west into the Anduin Vales, where they have recently settled. But there are several passes through Mirkwood, and so they may want to head back to attempt to recapture some of their old territory, which would put them right on your doorstep. So lots of potential opportunities, threats, and just interesting stuff to take into account with the League of the North. So I hope we've enjoyed this look at them. Again, stay tuned to the channel for future updates. We're going to have faction updates for the remaining factions every Wednesday, and then we'll do some other kinds of previews to see what else the mod has to offer. Thanks very much for watching. Until the next one, take care.